Australia's about to have a freedom of religion bill. Is it going to be good for us? Is it going to be bad for us? There's different opinions, and not all of them not all of the opponents are actually from a anti-Christian background. There's a lot of Christians who have some concerns about this freedom. And, there's some valid points on either side of this. And so joining me today is Dr. Kafataris, and he'll help me pronounce his name better if I've stuffed it up in just a moment. But we're going to get into this and talk about his organisation, the Australian Christian Alliance, in this episode of Pellowe Talk.
I'm an anti-feminist because I think it's oppressive. I think it's anti-male. I think it's anti-femininity.
Now, it may be a very weak Brexit, but I tell you what, Brexit of any kind and leaving those treaties as well.
That's the best ever interview. Michael Parkinson, you got nothing on this bloke.
G'day, I'm Dave Pellowe, and welcome to Pellowe Talk. And welcome to a special guest for this interview, Dr. Kafataris. Have I pronounced it right?
Yes, David, you have. Well done. It's spelled exactly the way it sounds.
That makes it easy. Yeah, people sometimes try and convolute my name as well, Pellowe,
yes.
And just it was sometimes pretty embarrassing in high school, but I've long gotten over it since then.
Yes. I used to get Kafataris, but that's about as bad as it got for me.
I've watched enough Greek TV shows to be familiar with the pronunciation.
Good on you.
So tell me about you, Dr. Khan. What are you a doctor of, and how does your professional life work? Just for a bit of background for us.
Well, I do what you would call occupational medicine, and I guess the best way to think of what I do is if you ever get injured at work, whether it's Queensland, Victoria, where your work cover will send you to somebody to be examined, determine if the injury is work-related and what's the best way to do the rehab and all that. And that's what I do.
So you're the guy that tries to stop us claiming compo?
No, I am the guy that tries to stop the dodgy ones claiming compo, yeah. But if the genuine claims, I go into bat for to make sure that people get back to work because that's the best outcome for them.
Very good. I'm glad you don't mind me teasing you this early in our friendship.
No, that's fine. I get it at parties too, yeah.
I bet you do.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Australian Christian Alliance. This is an organisation not many of us would have heard of. Where's it sprung up from? Why? And what's the plan?
Okay, good questions. It really sprung up about 18 months ago. Well, actually, before that, it sprung up soon after the same-sex marriage legalisation. And it really came out of, I met a couple of guys in Fairfield in Western Sydney who were really upset, pissed off to be perfectly frank, with their local member, Chris Bowen, because he was very open in his Hansard speech that he knew his community would vote no for same-sex marriage, and yet he basically said, I'm voting yes anyway. So, and you've got to understand, he's got a very large Middle Eastern constituency and very large Mediterranean constituency, and basically to them he was just saying, stick it, I don't care what you think. And this is given the fact that his electorate had 2/3 opposed same-sex marriage. So
wow.
The least he could have done was either abstained or found some way to get out of it, like Tony Abbott did and Morrison and those other guys. So that one thing you don't do to people from the Middle East is tell them to stick it. I can tell you, any of my listeners who are familiar. So they got angry, and anyway, they were sort of looking for some kind of leadership, and I sort of fell into that. I didn't know any of those people to begin with. I didn't even live there at the time. But as the Lord would have it, I have an office in the electorate, and so my electoral address is now in Chris Bowen's electorate. And we started talking. Well, it's the old saying, don't get mad, get even. So we started thinking, well, what can we do? And one thing led to another, and we decided to raise the profile of religious freedom because I could see that religious freedom was the next thing, the next battle coming at us.
Sure.
I looked at same-sex marriage a little bit like the Battle of Dunkirk. It was a defeat, it was decisive defeat, but it wasn't like the end of the war.
Mm-hmm.
But religious freedom, the analogy to me was like the Battle of Britain. because if we lose the ability to verbalize our beliefs, then we lose everything. So I could see that coming as the next one. And so we decided to be a bit vocal about it. We ran a rally before the recent state election in Fairfield, and had a very controversial figure out to speak, a guy named Mark Latham, that you may be familiar with.
Yeah. He's the guy who did the first church and state live event together.
Yes. Yeah. So you know Mark. And so Mark basically stuck it to Chris Bowen, and this is funny coming from a former Labor leader, sticking it to another. And he said, you know, in his speech, he says, you know, change the leaders, and he says one guy you should change is this Chris Bowen. He said he doesn't represent you. If the community said no on same-sex marriage, that's he should have voted. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, right.
And so we started to get a lot of interest after that, and we then I got sought out by a group of Muslims who were concerned.
Let me, before you go on, I just want to comment on what you just said and what Mark Latham said, because we like to take teachable moments out of this. What Chris Bowen should have done is been honest about his voting intentions.
That's right.
He should have voted according to his convictions, not according to the electorate's convictions.
Yeah.
But if the electorate doesn't like his convictions, they should fire him. He should stick to his convictions. This is my belief. He shouldn't try and reflect his electorate. That is not what represent means. It means you lead them. If they're wrong, you educate them, you try and bring them with you. But if you can't, you risk your career on it and prepare to die politically for the right reasons. And this is the conviction and backbone that politics is lacking. And so I encourage politicians, do what you think is right, regardless of what your electorate says. Try and lead them, listen to them, try and let them persuade you. If you're wrong, you could be. It's not like you're perfect. But once you've got a conviction on a position, then you go to bat for it.
Yes.
And let them fire you if you fail to persuade them.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's my position. What are your thoughts on that before we move on to some of the Muslim leaders that you met with?
Yeah, look, I philosophically, I agree with you in that if you are going to take a position where you know your community are going to be different, you've got to take a long time to bring them on board, okay? And it's interesting, another Labor MP I've spoken to recently conceded that. She said that, and I'll mention her name, Anne Stanley, she said, we didn't do enough to bring people with us on same-sex marriage. And she's right. Now, you don't go to in an electorate where basically most people don't speak English as a first language to an English-speaking paper in 2015, which has a small circulation with a small article saying that, oh, by the way, I'm going to support same-sex marriage. You do it in a big way. You know, especially if a postal vote's coming out, you tell people, listen, I'm in favour of this. If the community votes no, I will be voting yes. And all of that. That's what you would do if you were going to be this kind of conviction politician you talked about.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, he didn't do any of that. And,
so he effectively misled the electorate.
That's what they felt, yes.
Effectively.
Yes. And even if he didn't do enough after either before or after the vote to convey or to placate, bring them along, whatever,
right.
To teach them, as you said. He just assumed that there'd be no consequences, and so he took them for granted. And unfortunately, now he suffered the consequences. But anyway, we'll get to that. So you wanted to ask about the Muslims that reached out.
Yeah. So that comment aside, talk to me as you were continuing before I interrupted.
Okay. Well, what happened was they were concerned about. See, fundamentally, here's the problem you've got with same-sex marriage. Why was it the lightning rod that started all this? Not because there's anything sort of inherently more sinful about same-sex marriage than other things that the Bible wouldn't support. But the problem was, with religious freedom, it's been an assumed freedom. There's never been anything that's codified in law.
Correct.
And it's never been an issue before because we've never had something that has been so blatantly contradictory to scriptures codified in law. Mm-hmm. And so now I use the analogy of positive versus negative rights, or they've given a positive right to same-sex marriage.
That's right.
But the Bible and the Quran, the scriptures that represent 4 billion people around the world, see it as an abomination. Now, whether you agree with those scriptures or not is irrelevant. That's what those scriptures say.
That's right.
And so the question then is, what about the people who want to stay true to their scriptures? Do they have a positive right to articulate those scriptures? The Pellowe case, for example, whether you agree with what Pellowe did or how he did it, the bottom line is he paraphrased really 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10.
Yep.
He should have the right to do that. That's what the scriptures say. So the Muslims could see that as well. And so they started to see that, Labor was, in their eyes, was more supportive of gays and lesbians than they were of their community, and that wasn't something they were going to stomach.
Good.
So in a sense, our Islamic brothers and sisters are far more hardcore than we are, I'll tell you that. So they reached out to us, and we started talking about, okay, what could we do before the federal election to change things? Then the Lord opened doors for me to speak to people like the National Imams Council and a couple of different influential Shia clerics. I did a presentation to maybe 60-odd Muslim leaders 2 days before the election, and really highlighted Labor's agenda, the fact that Labor was, and what I did was, because I like to take the official documents rather than just talk off the top of my head. So I'm the sort of guy that reads all the stuff that gives other people brain damage. That's the joke they say about me, right? So you're probably familiar with the Labor National Platform, that 300-page manifesto.
Yeah.
So I went through that, and I shared a lot of it with the people, and you could see their jaws drop in the room. Once they realised that they were looking at a surgery commissioner, a gender reassignment surgery on demand with Medicare, and all that sort of stuff. Right?
Yep.
And so, they got very concerned, and you started to see texts going out from influential leaders to all of their WhatsApp groups, don't vote for Labor. And that was one of the reasons. I mean, we weren't the only reason, but we were one of the reasons why there was such a big swing in Western Sydney against the Labor Party. And it's interesting, in McMahon, where we were operating a lot, and we were doing a lot of letterbox drops, and I was speaking in different churches to different bishops. 10% of that electorate almost swung from Labor and voted for One Nation.
Wow.
Right? And the One Nation candidate, from a standing start, it helped that he was a good guy and he's got integrity. But he went from I think his 4 or 5 week campaign, from a standing start, one man show, right? He picked up nearly 10,000 votes primarily off Labor. And here's the thing, and the ABC did a story on this recently. This is from an electorate where the federal leader, said 30 years ago that we're in danger of being swamped by Asians. Mm-hmm. Then on her second stint in Parliament, says we're in danger of being swamped by Muslims.
Yep.
Yet this electorate has lots of Asians and Muslims in it.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so they all voted for her.
Yep.
Now, why did they do that? Because they saw that One Nation was a safer pair of hands with respect to their religious freedom than the Labor Party. Because love Pauline or hate Pauline, they saw her as someone who was standing for conviction.
Well, she's what Chris Bowen isn't, and that's somebody who says exactly what she's thinking, and you never need to wonder exactly how she's going to vote on the floor of Parliament in most cases.
100%, and that's you'd be surprised how many people in Fairfield actually respect Pauline for that.
Well, of course, I think most people do,
Yeah.
and look, in past elections, I think in every election we should be undecided voters and genuinely survey all candidates to see which one is the best and most closely aligns to our most important values. And I don't find myself loving One Nation or their leader, but I have voted for their local candidate above any others.
Yes.
Because they best represented the values more than the major parties did in my electorate.
That's right, and I would agree with you in that, and that's what I was telling those Muslims. He was saying, well, if I don't vote for Labor, who do I vote for? I said, well, he said, I still want to vote for Labor, and I said, well, even if you do, make sure you go and see your candidate. Make sure you don't give your vote away. Make sure they They know that if you're going to support them, they must change, or they must. And I was trying to get across to them, and
Very good.
and there were shifts, because that guy who was an influential leader, eventually, even though he told everybody he was going to vote Labor, he didn't vote Labor. You know, and so it's interesting. The Middle East is like that, where what people might say to you in front of the crowd versus what they tell people to do on the side are two different things. So after that, we started to get more interest from other religious leaders, and right now I'm sort of working informally on I guess you would call it an Australian Religious Alliance, the ARA, where we have Shia, Sunni, Jew, Catholic, Protestant, Baptist, Presbyterian, the Orthodox, all at the table, and we've had a number of round tables talking about the religious discrimination bill and other things. And we sent a letter after our first meeting. We sent a letter to Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, and 2 weeks after that, we had the round table with Scott Morrison in August in Sydney, looking at and out of that came the exposure draft. So we have been able to have some influence, and the Alliance will be meeting again once the bill comes out, which will be next week, as I understand it. And we're going to look through and see, okay, are we going to accept it? Are we going to reject it? Are we going to call for amendments? We've got a number of strategies we're looking at.
So haven't you already looked at the draft exposure and commented on that? Because the Attorney General, Christian Porter, has basically said there's not going to be much changes from that. He's pretty committed to it.
Yeah, no, that's all. That's political rhetoric. There will be changes. There won't be changes. There won't be enough changes to keep us happy, because an exposure draft is by definition just an exposure draft. It's not the parliamentary bill. And it's, when I was talking because in between the release of the exposure draft and now, I've been talking to different MPs on both sides of the fence, and all of them have said, "Oh, look, this is just an exposure draft." And I said, "Yeah, I know that, but I just want to know what your feeling is on this." And Labor were very coy. They weren't going to give anything away. And my Muslim colleague said to them, "You can't sit on the fence on this." He said, "You're going to have to make a choice. Are you going to look after gays and lesbians, or are you going to look after our community? You can't do both." And I think that encapsulates the problem that Labor has, that you got.
I hope I get the spirit of what he was saying, right? Because I disagree with the words of what he was saying. Yeah. I think freedom looks after everybody, and protecting freedom doesn't neglect to look after the homosexual people. It just says, hey, everybody has the right for government to get out of the road of expressing themselves, which I don't think is harmful to anybody. We've got this notion in political discourse now that harm can be emotional. Well, no, that's just not the case. Harm is objectively measurable. Otherwise, your claim to harm, well, anybody can do that, and that's not a legal threshold. It's tyrannical if it becomes one.
Yes, no, I think what he was talking about was
pandering to the agendas.
The way I take it is you got two mutually exclusive agendas. That's the problem. If you look at pure LGBT ideology, for however you want to term it,
that works.
Okay, and I guess very conservative Christian Muslim ideology. On the issue of sexuality, they're mutually exclusive, because the Bible says God created male and female, and that marriage is between man and woman. This side would say no, marriage is not between a man and woman. Marriage can be whatever you make it.
They're at the least contradictory, yeah.
Yeah. So, and so you have to decide how you're going to reconcile those. That's the problem you've got. And the president of the Imams Council, to his credit, said, "Look, you've given them their rights. That's fine. We're not going to begrudge that, but we want our rights too."
Yeah.
And so,
and this is the thing: is protecting religious freedom doesn't criminalize homosexuality.
No. But
protecting the feelings of homosexuality from criticism and articulation of contradictory beliefs literally criminalizes Christianity.
Yes, yes, and so that's what I said. The way I put it is that I feel I'm philosophically opposed to same-sex marriage, like I'm philosophically opposed to de facto relationships and sex outside of marriage, etc.
Sure.
But the government has legalized those, so I have to accept that they're legal. I can be philosophically opposed, and I can articulate my opposition. Right. Now, in the same way, the person who believes in same-sex marriage or who's a homosexual can be philosophically opposed to my position, but he has to accept my right to articulate my position, just like I accept their right to articulate their position. And if we want to have a debate, which I've done on a couple of occasions, then let's, may the best man win. It's the same with religious freedom. One of the reasons this alliance is working is because we've agreed that we're not going to talk about theology and we're not going to talk about Palestine. We're going to talk about our right, protecting our rights for our religious freedom, which the Jews should have, the Muslims should have. And interestingly, at an event on Monday night, I had Scientologists coming up to me.
Wow.
Now, they want to join, and now the High Court has recognised them as a religion. So we can't deny them a seat at the table when we're talking about those issues, even though I may think some of their beliefs are a little bit, different.
Perverse.
Yeah, I'll use I may disagree with their beliefs, right?
Yeah.
But if the High Court recognises them as a religion, okay, the law of the land recognises them as a religion. I may disagree with that recognition, but I have to accept I may disagree with that decision, but I have to recognise that they've done that. So in the same way, in our alliance, we stick to the issues of religious freedom, and so we are going to have to look at the bill. Getting back to your original question, the exposure draft was never going to be where they would land on this. The exposure draft was a bit like when you're going to buy a car. You go in with a stupid offer, or you're going to buy. Most people are going with a bit of a silly offer, and they know they're not going to pay that, but you never know. The vendor might be,
lowballing. Yep. Yeah,
lowballing, and so. From everything I've the analysis and people I've talked to.
Well, the draft exposure is lowballing.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's lowballing. That's what the government did, and we knew that would.
I have very little optimism that they're going to improve their offer. Very little. I'm genuinely surprised you're more optimistic.
Well, let's qualify. Optimistic is a relative term. Relative to what? Okay. I think they've improved their offer by maximum 40% of what we need. Okay. For example, yesterday, the Attorney General made it clear that they would include aged care facilities and hospitals with the protections to employ people based on religious beliefs. So that's a shift. That's not what was in the exposure draft. There are a number of other things that I've been told that they will alter, like they will clarify definitions of what's reasonable. They'll clarify definitions of vilify, things like that. Now, that still doesn't go anywhere near far enough. We need a lot more. We need, I've got a whole list of things that need to be amended. Do I think that's going to be in the parliamentary bill? No. I think we're not going to like the bill personally. The decision we've got to make is, okay, what do we do? Because we've got three choices here. We can either accept it as we're given and just take our medicine and be good little boys and girls and sit in the corner and just suck our thumbs. Second choice we can make is we can say, no, we're going to toss this out. Throw it out. Just, dump the whole process, make that much noise that we make it too politically toxic for the government to proceed, or lobby the senators to bury the bill in the Senate. Yep. As what happened with the Penny Wong bill. And stick to what we have. Which may not necessarily be a bad thing. Yep. And the third choice is to push for amendments in the Senate. So
we're going to see exactly what Con thinks we should do with one of those three options in just a second. But first, have you ever wondered if the ABC would ever again be balanced and representative of all Australians? Apparently, statistics and surveys of the political leanings of ABC employees reveal that there's 3 times the population average of Greens voters employed by the ABC, our national broadcaster, who is legislated to speak evenly. And of course, the rest of the mainstream media is likewise remarkably left-leaning. Even those people who claim to be our most prominent conservative commentators in the media that the lefties will moan about all the time, many of them are really not full conservatives. They're pro-choice, pro-abortion. Rita Panahi recently said something along the lines of, I think I'm pro-choice, but killing a baby at 8 months is too far. Well, no, that's not a conservative position at all. Pro-choice is not conservative. Pellowe Talk is here to bring that balance. And if you want Pellowe Talk to stick around, then you need to join the army of Pellowe Talk Partners who are sticking their hand in their pocket, and for as little as $3 a month, just saying, I'm going to make sure that this extra commentary and interviews is around for the long term. So head to Pellowe Talk, the website, which is davepellowe.com. Click on the donate button and become a Pellowe Talk partner so I can keep bringing more information and interviews like this, highlighting, explaining issues, and introducing you to the thought leaders around Australia who are shaping the debate and contributing to a conversation that's not just one-sided. So, Dr. Con Kafataris, exactly which of these three options do you think we should go with? Do you think we should cooperate and submit to the government's agenda? Do you think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and reject the whole thing? Or do you think there's a middle ground? And if so, what do you think that looks like?
Okay. I definitely don't think we should accept the parliamentary bill. I think we've come too far, and see, this is a little bit like a watershed moment in history. We need to fight this, because if we sort of, just take our medicine on this, then there'll be no stopping. Like
Right.
Especially if you have a change of government, and I'm not pro-Liberal, pro-Labor, but generally speaking, Labor governments are more left-leaning and more.
Of course, yeah. That's an
so,
uncontroversial statement.
Yes, that's right. And so, if we get a Labor government elected in the future, and we don't make a stoush out of it now, then they'll be a lot more emboldened to come after freedoms in the future.
Yep.
A little bit like what's happening in New South Wales now. Euthanasia has been put off this parliament, apparently. That's what I heard, because of the massive stoush that happened with the abortion bill. I'm not saying it's not going to come back again, but they will do their homework next time, and they'll make sure that they don't get blindsided, or they don't blindside people like they did with the abortion bill. So,
yeah, I've heard each ways on that as well. I wouldn't let my guard down on euthanasia. I think it's coming anyway.
Yeah, no, it is. But they'll be a lot smarter about it this time. They won't just sneak it through the night before like they did.
Having said that, New South Wales got better amendments across the line than any of the other states where the government took full consideration. So,
yeah,
interesting, and well done to you guys.
Well, I think it's because statistically we have a higher proportion of religious voters as well, and they're more animated, for want of a better word.
I'm going to be a bit more generous and say you got a higher percentage of virtuous voters.
Okay, yeah, but okay,
a virtuous democracy is the only way democracy works.
Yes,
and an immoral democracy who doesn't mind killing babies is going to create a tyranny.
Yes. No, I suppose what I'm saying is if you look across we have a higher percentage of conservative people living in New South Wales simply because that's just the demographics.
Yeah. They've got an objective moral compass that's not not saturated in self-supremacy.
Yeah, that's right. And you've got more people who are first generation migrants that have that moral compass and all that. So there's a number of factors. So I think that we should fight. The only question as yet is so that, and I'm a bit divided about, because it'll depend on what's in the bill.
Right.
On the one hand, if the bill is really bad and unsalvageable, I think we should dump it, because the status quo won't be necessarily the status quo. The fact that the government now knows, well, more importantly, the fact that we have so many different faiths aligned, and for example, we've got people in this alliance now talking about putting together an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, where it's been a game changer. Most of the politicians as soon as they hear about this multi-faith alliance that's occurring, body language changes.
Wow.
Right? And so, because it's never happened before, even simple little things like getting Sunni, Shia, and Jew on the same table.
Yeah. And agreeing to not talk about Palestine. It's incredibly mature.
Yes, thank you. And perhaps one of the, if I may say, they say to me, Dr. Con, nothing like this has been done before, you know, and they say, you know, you've been responsible for pulling this together. Perhaps it's because I'm not a religious leader, and I'm you know, it's a lot easier for someone who's an outsider to bring warring parties together than someone who's inside the tent, so to speak.
Interesting, yeah.
So yeah, I've been told, and it's been very humbling as to how, like, literally, it's never been done before. What's happening? So, given that, keeping what we have may be a good option. But the challenge will be it'll be determined by what happens with the ALRC. Now, you're probably familiar with that, but your listeners may not be familiar with that. So I'll just need to cover that.
The Australian Law Reform Commission.
Yeah, that's right. Now, do you remember? Your listeners may be familiar with the Penny Wong bill that we missed end of last year. We dodged the bullet on that. Well, instead of burying the bill, what they did was they handballed it off to the Law Reform Commission. And their brief is to look at how can we remove the current exemptions in the Sex Discrimination Act that are the only protection religious schools have with respect to employment. How can we remove those and yet allow the schools to maintain their religious ethos? So what the Law Reform Commission comes back with is going to be a big factor, because
Law Reform Commissions, whether state-based or federal, are never anything other than a show, a facade to make it look credible and intellectual in the imposition of a leftist Marxist agenda.
Don't disagree with you, but
that's what my listeners, if they've listened to for a long time, will have heard from me before.
And
the show of sending abortion legislation to a Law Reform Commission is simply so that they can blame somebody else for the contents of the legislation.
Absolutely, but because when you look at the politics, what the Law Reform Commission comes back with will be used by the government to implement or to either strengthen or weaken whatever provisions they want to impose on us. So we need to know, it would be good to know what the Law Reform Commission is going to say if we're going to maintain the status quo. Now, we may not, they're not due to report till April 2020. There was an interim report this year, but Christian Porter buried that because he knew that the two were interrelated, and he's trying to, for his own reasons. So maintaining the status quo is that's one way. I think that we've certainly brought the issue to the forefront in what we've done. The second option, which I think is better, at least, is to if the bill is if it's in the form that with amendments we could stomach. Now, having said this, I'm not in favour of anti-discrimination legislation. I think that it'd be fix the problem, dump the whole thing.
Exactly.
And many lawyers and legal academics have said the same thing.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, we can't get all the states to cooperate with that.
No. So if we're going to have...
Which we need.
Yep. If we're going to have anti-discrimination legislation, if we're going to have it anyway, then we should do whatever we can to make sure that the law is as workable for us as possible. So if looking at the third scenario, what we'll be looking to do is draw up a list of amendments that must be there to support the legislation, and we've got some connections with some senators, and we'll be going into battle in the Senate. Now, there are two reasons for that. Number one, to give us the best chance of getting the amendments through, but also number two, and I've said this to the religious leaders I've been talking to. See, at the ACA, I'm not accountable to a congregation, but an archbishop is, an imam is. And if we end up getting a hopeless bill, those men and women have to be able to stand hand on heart before their congregations and say, we fought as hard as we could, okay? and here's the list of amendments we fought for, and here's what the senators did, and okay, let's punish them at the next election, but whatever we could. If we don't fight, then they can't say that. And so I personally think we should be fighting, and we should be, having the debate on each of these amendments.
Yep.
So that there's a public record of how we stood up.
Yeah. Have you got a? Oh, sorry, my computer volume. Have you got a resource on your website for average voters to be able to take just a couple of simple talking points to their local members and to represent what they want, with the promise of support if they support these changes, or punishment if they refuse? Like, we'll look for somebody better to represent us.
Yes, we have. I have a number of that stuff now. Probably the best thing to do is just post my email address rather than the website. Why? Because we're growing, changing. Things are changing so rapidly, and our website has had to have a major revamp because we're like you, David. We're volunteers, and we and
run off the smell of an oily rag.
Yes, and maybe a good way to explain, differentiate the ACA. We're a bit like guerrilla warriors. We don't want to have big committees, because committees don't achieve very much.
True. And
so we're small, mobile, but we've had a very big impact. But my email address, if people want to contact me, and I've got lots of resources that I can send to them.
Brilliant. What's your email address? ConMGP, that's CON for November, M for Mary, G for George, P for Peter, at outlook.com. ConMGP@outlook.com. I'll put that in a link beneath the video description as well.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think we should probably put a bookmark in it there and maybe continue this conversation another time. Have you got any concluding thoughts you'd like to leave with the Pellowe Talk listeners?
I'd like all your listeners, and I'm probably echoing what Dave has already hammered to you, but if I can hammer it again, these men and women in Parliament, they work for you, and something I've been hammering to and it's the middle that the migrant communities are just starting to wake up. They work for you. You need to hold them accountable. You need to go and see them. You need to go and ring them. You need to bombard them with emails. You need to with requests for meetings. I've had now 3 Labor MPs that have agreed to go through the parliamentary draft with me, page by page.
Wow.
Why? Because I told them, it's very important to me. It's important to how I vote, and I'm going to be telling all my friends about it. All right. So they will sit down with you. They will go through it with you, but you've got to ask.
Yep.
So don't take the power you have for granted, and don't give them your vote for nothing.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that.
Right.
Now, Sanctity of Life Sunday is an initiative that started in America in 1984 with a president who took leadership for the nation and said, we're going to celebrate the fact that life is a sacred gift from God. Now, the Australian church is not waiting for such a leader. We're actually going to take the initiative and be the leaders in changing the culture in Australia to celebrate the fact that life is a sacred gift from God. Now, the legalization of abortion first happened in Australia on the 26th of May, 1969. And on the Sunday on or nearest that 26th of May each year, Australian Christians are joining together starting next year to declare life is a sacred gift from God, to declare a national day observing the sanctity of life. If you'd like more information on about how you can join in and how your church, your congregation, your pastor can help celebrate and take this lead in changing the culture to honor and the sacred gift of life from God in our nation, it's something we need to do. If we're ever going to change the laws, we have to change the culture first, and the church can have a very important part in doing this. Head to sanctityoflifesunday.com.au. That's sanctityoflifesunday.com.au. There's lots of information there. There's a growing collection of resources because this is like Christmas. It's not belonging to any denomination or organization or individual. This is a gift from God that all Christians acknowledge and celebrate as a gift to the world. And so the resources there are a collection from all kinds of people, Orthodox and Salvation Army and Presbyterians and Catholics. There's prayers, there's sermons, and you're welcome to contribute stuff from your faith because this belongs to everybody and is a resource for everybody to help make it easier for pastors and ministers to sensitively and without any condemnation or judgment just celebrate the gift of life. So that's sanctityoflifesunday.com.au. Dr. Con, thank you so much for joining Pellowe Talk today, and I've really enjoyed hearing about the way you're bringing faith groups together, religious groups together, and there's definitely more to talk about on this subject, but it's been very enlightening. You can email at that detail, which is in the link. And again, thank you for joining us, Dr. Con.
Just one thing before I go, Dave, for you, just to so your listeners the time frames, because I didn't cover this.
Yep.
The bill will be next week. It's expected to go through the lower house, and then it will go to the Senate, and that's where it'll be won or lost. So the Senate will go to the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. That will call for public submissions. So people need to mobilize themselves. Unfortunately, it will be most likely January. So everyone's away, but we need to mobilize ourselves and bombard the Senate with submissions.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely take this issue up again on Pellowe Talk and make sure that we give people lots of information so they can write a good, strong submission, because it'll probably come down to quantity as opposed to quality. There'll be plenty of quality submissions there, but counting the number of voices is very important. You don't need to think like a university professor academic. A plumber and a teenager, no disrespect to plumbers, my first job, can write a good parliamentary submission.
Okay.
Dr. Con, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for this episode of Pellowe Talk. You can subscribe to newsletters and follow me at davepellowe.com on the website. And you can also join us on social media at Dave Pellowe. I look forward to seeing you in the comments section. Bye-bye.